On this week's Inside the Investigations, the state is now stepping in to keep watch over the largest school district in Central Texas after investigators found it was failing to test some of its most vulnerable kids on time.
Now, KXAN investigator Kelly Wiley found even once those kids have been tested, they're waiting an illegal amount of time for the help they've been promised to start.
We were fulfilling as many, if not all of those that could be within the appropriate timeline. Some of those might have been missed.
In this episode, we discuss why the district is so behind and what happens as kids wait.
And good Wednesday morning to everybody who is watching us here on KXAN Live. I'm Will Dupree coming to you from the KXAN Live studio, where we are bringing you once again another edition of Inside the Investigations, where we take an in-depth look at some of the stories that our incredible investigative team have been uncovering the last week. And joining me, as always, is investigative reporter Kelly Wiley. Kelly,
Hello.
Welcome back.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Very nice to see you because we are focusing on a story that you just did very recently here at KXAN. And if you take a look right here, the headline right there. Kelly, while we're jumping into this story and discussing this, I just want to mention the context of where we're talking. So, of course, at the state capitol, there has been much debate about education savings accounts where families could potentially use public dollars to pay for private education. Our politics team has been all over that story, but you've been really digging into something that's a little bit even closer to home at Austin ISD related to its special education services. Talk about what those issues were going into this story that you reported.
Yeah, I think this year in particular has been a lesson in all the different levels of government that can affect your student and your student's classroom. But Austin ISD is really known for being a great school district with good schools, teachers who care. The district has overall B rating. It's a really property-rich school district. It actually has some of the most money raked back by the state and then spread out to other school districts who are needing more funding. So that's kind of the background, a very simplistic background on Austin ISD. But in January, we did find out that for the last several years, as far back as 2019, the district has been breaking a federal law when it comes to their special education requirements. Specifically, this law requires them to test and evaluate kids who are suspected of needing special education services. These can be things like reading intervention, dyslexia small groups, counseling. The list goes on and on for the types of services the school can provide. The Texas Education Agency, which if you're not familiar, kind of works like a state regulator over school districts. They published a report in March saying that Austin ISD repeatedly failed to evaluate kids on time. And to go even further down into this law, you're supposed to, by federal law, evaluate kids who've gotten parental consent within 45 school days. And in some cases, the state found the district waited as long as 9 months to do these evaluations. To kind of catch us up to where we are now, in the end, the district ended up agreeing to a state monitor, which is basically someone that the education commissioner appoints to watch over how the district operates and then report back to the Texas Education Agency. This was a better option than what the TEA originally recommended, which was a conservator management team. That team would have actually had the power to direct the actions of Austin ISD. Now, this monitor is really just watching to make sure they hit certain deadlines that were set out in this agreement. The district has agreed to a ton of deadlines around catching up on overdue evaluations. And in the last several months, they've actually managed to, according to their own reporting, bring down their backlog from over 1,700 kids who were overdue for these evaluations to, at last checked, around 400 that were overdue for these evaluations.
Okay, so they've whittled away and done those evaluations for more kids. So there is progress happening there. But your story that you just reported, and we showed the headline a few moments ago, looked into another issue that you found in your story.
Yeah, it's all interconnected, but essentially we had found another backlog. This whole time that we've been reporting on the state investigation and what AISD was now going to be held to in order to not have that next notch up of a conservator, the whole time we've been hearing from parents that the issues with Austin ISD Special Education Department go beyond just the wait times for kids to be evaluated. And even in the agreement with the district, you can see that the state is asking for more than just the district to come into compliance on that one federal law. There's a lot of talk about audits and something called eligibility determinations. This is the idea that after a kid has been evaluated and identified as needing special education services, the district and AISD parents would have to come together and actually create a plan to help that student. And then the kid would actually start to get that help in the classroom. Now, there's not a federal law that around how quickly that needs to happen. But in Texas, there is a state law that sets out how quickly, now that we know the kid needs the help, how quickly the district has to come up with the plan and give the services. And the state says you have 30 calendar days to get that done.
And you really wanted to know whether or not the district, Austin ISD, was complying with that law. So that begs the question, are they?
Well, no, not completely. That's what we found. We found a record between the TEA and the district where they were essentially giving the state an update on how things were going with them trying to come into compliance on their special education requirements. The update that we got, it was from August 31st, and then we got another one from September 8th. That was weeks into the school year, just to give you a timestamp. And it showed that there were still kids, more than 400 at that time, that in the previous school year, they had been flagged as maybe needing this help and identified as needing the help. But at that September 8th mark, weeks into the school year, they still had not actually had their plans created, which means no help with those learning disabilities that were identified. Worse, we found there were a handful of kids, 30, from 2 school years before that had been flagged as potentially needing these services. The district had since found they qualified, but still they had no plan at that point for how to help them with their learning disabilities. So we're talking about 2 kids from 2 school years ago. When we talked to the district, they said it was still possible that within those 2 groups, that 400 and those 30 kids, there were still some kids that they were not technically breaking that second state law when it came to them. Because essentially, the clock starts on that 30 days to create the plan once the kid has been evaluated. So even if there was a delay in evaluating them, they could still be within the timeline to actually get that plan created. They also made the argument that they could have been evaluated towards the end of the school year or over the summer. But when we asked them to tell us, okay, how many of the kids were already technically overdue by state law for this help? At the time of our interview, they couldn't tell us. When we checked back in October, they told us they had since made education plans for hundreds of those kids. They said that at the time, this was October 19th, they had 239 kids still waiting. We know they need help, but they haven't gotten their plans yet. And they said among that group, that 239, that 35% of those kids, they were already overdue. Essentially, they had run out that timeline that the state gives them to get it done.
So what does this mean exactly?
Well, on the one hand, the district is telling us that they're making an effort to catch up. And the sentiment that we've heard from them is that we're kind of in catch-up mode on all of this. And so they're acknowledging that, that they are overdue on some of these kids, getting them these services. And so in that way, the effort is being made, according to them, to kind of right the ship. But then you've got, these kids who, when you think about a kid learning, it's this kind of finite amount of time when they're developing, think like 3rd grade, you're making that transition from learning to read to reading to learn, right? All of these things have benchmarks and landmarks and reading levels and kind of benchmarks they're hoping kids are going to hit. And when we talk to experts, these delays and gaps, is what you would expect when you're not getting the aid that a student needs for a learning disability for these gaps of time. It can compound the issues, right? It can compound the issues, and the longer you wait, the more exasperated the issues get and the learning loss gets. And with kids, again, you have this kind of finite amount of time to get them on level and to make sure that they're progressing. And the question that we heard from the parent that we interviewed, who her kid's been identified for a long time and has IEP plans, but there were other issues that came up. Her question was, how do you catch them up? And I think for the parents and for the kids, that's really the question. The district is definitely making efforts from what they're telling us and showing us to get on track. But again, at the bottom line is, are kids going to be caught up in time? And that kind of brings in the question of compensatory services, which, if you're not familiar, compensatory services could be the district saying, because of this gap that happened, we're going to give you an hour extra of speech therapy or an hour extra every week of, a small group to work on these issues. It could be them having to pay parents to get these services elsewhere, to bring a third party in. And so this, I think, more than any story we've ever covered, is developing constantly, and we're trying to keep up with the district to figure out how they're catching the students up, how much funding they're putting towards that, and where they stand now.
Well, you've shed so much light on the situation and made it a very digestible, easy to understand way, because it is very complicated.
Yes.
And of course, you've been following this for months and months at this point, and the latest update you can read about right here on our website. The headline there, at 15, she needs special education and homebound services to learn. For weeks, she got neither. That's available right now in our investigative section on KXAN.com. So please check that out and review the full story there that Kelly and the team put together, because it is so comprehensive, so easy to understand, and really gets you caught up on this particular issue. Kelly, every week when we've done these Inside the Investigations conversations, we like to highlight kind of what's coming next so that people at least have an idea of what to expect with our coverage and with our team. And something really big is going to kick off next week. We're going to start this new Catalyst project. And a number of us here at the station, including myself, have been involved with this series of stories that are really focusing on the number of legislative proposals affecting particularly the LGBTQ plus community here in Texas, and really drilling in on this repeated effort to repeal the state's ban on homosexual conduct. A part of this will be a podcast, and there will be some video elements as well, including some stories focusing on different policies that came up during this last regular legislative session and whether or not they might come back in the future. A lot of advocates are watching that for sure, and a number of others who support these particular legislative measures. So that's all going to be encompassed in this new project. And Kelly, I know that a lot of people here on our team have been involved with this.
Yes. I mean, I don't think I've been more excited to watch Project. There's been so much that's gone into this. I can't wait for you to see Will's story that'll be in this. But you're getting right now a sneak peek at the trailer for the podcast of this. And I love a podcast, Will.
Same right here. We've talked about this many times.
I love listening to podcasts in my car, and I hope this will be on your rotation, because this is a really layered, compelling story. And I'll say less, and we'll go ahead and play the clip.
Take a listen.
Police now identify Stephen Rios as the officer on leave from the department because of his personal relationship with homicide victim Jesse Valencia.
This police officer was calling my son. He was just harassing him to the point that my son was afraid of him.
The fate of the former Columbia police officer Stephen Rios is in the hands of the jury.
A year of struggle, secrets, and emotion come down to today.
From KXAN News, this is Catalyst, an investigative podcast. I'm your host, Josh Hinkle, and this 6th season of Catalyst, Were you ever worried for his safety because he was gay?
It always made me nervous. And I kept thinking to myself, well, I'm not going to be there to protect him.
Nearly 20 years ago, the murder of a gay college student in Missouri was the first time I really had to stop and question, how do I cover this story as a gay journalist objectively? Cases like that shape our communities and our approach to reporting. As our team of journalists explore a record number of legislative proposals impacting LGBTQ+ Texans, they share the point where personal and professional experiences intersect.
Where I grew up is a small town that probably the worst thing you could be called was gay. It was just trying to survive in that environment.
It's something that's hard, especially in an industry where we value this idea of objectivity, but at the same time, our identity is part of who we are.
We explore the decisions that go into covering issues close to home, how to maintain fairness and accuracy in the face of challenges.
So we try really hard to dig a little deeper, offer more points of view than anyone else. It's a process and it evolves.
Every episode of this season of Catalyst will be available all at once, Monday, November 13th.
I would hope newsrooms would really step back for just a second and think about the importance of this coverage, the need to get it right.
And again, you heard Josh Hinkle, who will be leading this project here at KXAN, talking about that. Podcast is going to drop all the episodes this coming Monday. You might have heard my voice as part of that. It was an honor to be able to ask to be part of that conversation, and a number of my other colleagues are going to be in that podcast too. So I'm anticipating what it's going to be like to be able to listen to myself talk about that. That's hard to do that. So yeah, it's going to be again very, very interesting, and then there will be stories that will be unrolled and shown all next week during our newscast. So please tune into that as this new Catalyst project, I should say, launches here at KXAN.
I cannot wait to listen. This is going to be my on the way to work podcast, so I'll be listening.
I don't know if I'll be doing that too, but we'll see. Just because I don't really
so
want to hear my voice.
Hearing yourself, yes.
Right. Well, investigative reporter Kelly Wiley, thank you so much for leading this conversation. I'm glad it was just in the family today.
I know, so talking. Cozy, just you and I.
Yeah. Well, everybody, I will let you know that next week the conversation for this will be focused on the Catalyst project. We'll have Josh Hinkle and one of our investigative producers, David Barrera, joining us for that conversation. So we look forward to talking to them. But Kelly, we'll see you next week.
See you soon. Thank you.
All right, everybody, that's Kelly Wiley. I'm Will Dupree. We will see you back here next week for another edition of Inside the Investigations. Take care.